August 15th. It was just another bright Saturday in Clintonville, Ohio. The kind of summer day when kids laughed at the public pool and mothers laid out dinner plates by open windows. 15-year-old Hailey Porter wrapped herself in her striped pink towel, slipped on her wet sandals, and told her friend she'd be home before dinner. She never made it back. Hours later, a pair of pink sandals lay abandoned near the fence behind Graceland shopping center. Her towel, still damp from the pool, was crumpled in the dirt beside a half-empty water bottle, beads of condensation glistening in the August heat. And as the sun disappeared, so did every trace of Hailey Porter. That night, the peaceful suburb of Clintonville became a search grid. Neighbors with flashlights combing the woods, parents calling out names into the dark, praying for a voice that never answered. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years, and the question still haunted every porch light in town. What really happened to Hailey Porter that afternoon? For 20 years, no one knew, until a single confession cracked open the truth that had been buried in those woods all along. So before you hear what investigators finally uncovered, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Because I spent hours putting this story together for those who still believe justice can reach across decades. People tell me no one subscribes to channels like this anymore, but I still believe good people will. So if you believe too, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, and may God bless everyone still searching for answers that time tried to erase. August 15th, 1998. Before anyone understood how quickly the world could turn dark, that Saturday in Clintonville felt like every other summer afternoon. Bright, blistering, safe. The sun pressed down on the tree-lined streets, cicadas singing loud above the distant shouts of children tumbling into the Graceland public pool. Clintonville, a peaceful suburb north of downtown Columbus, was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked. Neighbors greeted each other with a wave, and the biggest excitement was the Saturday farmers market by the old movie theater. On this day, 15-year-old Hailey Porter and her best friend Megan Riley spent hours in the cool, chlorinated blue of the pool. Hailey, always the quieter of the two, preferred to float on her back, squinting up at the sun, while Megan's laugh ricocheted off the pool tiles. To an outsider, they were just two ordinary girls clinging to the last golden weeks before high school began. By late afternoon, they'd had enough sun. Hailey climbed out, grabbing her striped pink towel, the one her mother bought her for her birthday, and wrapped herself tightly as if to hold on to the warmth. She slipped on her sandals, still slick from poolside puddles, and checked the time. Dinner wasn't for another hour, so there was no rush. Clintonville always felt timeless in the summer, each day stretching out lazy and safe. The girls walked together past the chain-link fence that separated the pool from the Graceland shopping center, the air scented with freshly cut grass and grilling burgers from a nearby backyard. Megan, more animated, chattered about an upcoming cheerleading tryout she'd heard about from a woman claiming to work for a local radio station. According to Megan, the woman had stopped them by the pool gates, all smiles and sunglasses, promising free t-shirts and soda for anyone who showed up. Hailey hesitated. She had her doubts. Her parents always warned her not to trust strangers, especially those with big promises. But Megan was persistent. "Just for a few minutes," Megan insisted. "If it's weird, we'll bail. I promise." It sounded harmless enough. The girls detoured toward the back of the shopping center, sticking close to the fence as the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the cracked blacktop. Hailey's mother, Martha Porter, was just starting to set the dinner table at home, expecting her daughter's return any moment. No one noticed the two girls as they slipped behind the rows of parked cars, giggling, Hailey clutching her half-filled water bottle and Megan twirling her ponytail. The Graceland shopping center had always been their unofficial playground, a place of arcades, ice cream stands, and whispered secrets behind the dumpsters. Today, though, it felt oddly deserted, as if the world had briefly looked away. A few hours later, after the sun had vanished behind the treetops, something was different in Clintonville. A pair of pink sandals lay abandoned near the fence, one tipped on its side in the dirt. Hailey's towel, still damp from the pool, was crumpled nearby, as if discarded in a hurry. There was a half-empty water bottle, beads of condensation pooling in the warm evening air. By the time the first police car pulled onto the narrow service road behind the mall, red and blue lights flashing against the darkness, a feeling of dread settled over the neighborhood. Residents gathered at their windows, murmuring, clutching their own children close. No one knew what had happened, only that something precious had been lost. As the searchlights pierced the night and officers began combing through the woods, the routine peace of Clintonville shattered in an instant. That night marked the beginning of a haunting mystery, one that would linger in the town's memory for years, a reminder of how quickly ordinary can become nightmare. What really happened to Hailey Porter that afternoon? The answer would unravel a web of secrets, and for Clintonville, nothing would ever be quite the same. Before that fateful summer day, Hailey Porter's world was small, safe, and full of quiet beauty, much like the town itself. Clintonville, with its leafy sidewalks and tidy houses, felt suspended in a gentle kind of time. Hailey lived just 3 blocks from the Graceland shopping center, in a modest, blue-painted house with white shutters and a garden overflowing with wildflowers that her mother, Martha, tended every morning. Hailey was the only child of David and Martha Porter, a couple who'd once dreamed of a bigger family, but found their whole universe in the gentle, creative girl they were blessed with. She had an artist's soul, a collection of spiral-bound sketchbooks filled with charcoal drawings of old houses, stray cats, and the trees lining High Street. She preferred quiet corners of the library to the cafeteria crowds, mysteries to romances, and her gentle, introspective way of seeing the world made her seem older than her years. Even her voice was soft, often lost in the din of louder personalities at school. Megan Riley, Hailey's best friend, was her opposite in every way. Where Hailey was quiet and careful, Megan was bold, outgoing, and quick with a laugh. She thrived in the center of attention, surrounded by friends, her locker always decorated with glittery stickers and notes. Still, the two were inseparable, a living proof that opposites not only attract, but sometimes complete each other. They spent every weekend together, often at the pool or sprawled out on Megan's porch sharing secrets, their friendship a constant through the tumults of adolescence. On the day of Hailey's disappearance, Clintonville wore its familiar summer face, streets dappled with shade, kids riding bikes to the corner store, sprinklers spinning in front yards, and the low hum of lawnmowers blending into a suburban symphony. The Graceland shopping center stood at the heart of it all, its mix of old stores, fast food joints, and faded signage like a scrapbook of neighborhood memories. It was a place of first jobs, first kisses, and endless afternoons. No one in Clintonville ever thought of it as dangerous. But even in places that seem safest, danger can lurk unnoticed. Megan would later remember how, after leaving the pool, They were approached by a woman who looked to be in her 20s. Long brown hair, sunglasses, a cheerful voice. She claimed to work for a local radio station and talked up a special cheerleading tryout being held behind the mall that afternoon. She offered flyers and promised free snacks, t-shirts, maybe even a chance to meet a local celebrity. Megan was instantly drawn in by the excitement, but Hailey felt a shadow of doubt. Still, Megan was persuasive, and the woman seemed harmless enough, her smile wide and practiced. After a brief hesitation, they agreed to check it out, just for a moment, just to see what it was all about. They made their way past the parking lot, skirting around delivery trucks, the air thick with the scent of hot asphalt and distant popcorn from the cinema. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the pavement as they turned the corner behind the shopping center, where dumpsters and faded graffiti replaced the bustle of shoppers. No crowds, no sign of any cheerleading event. Just the hum of a distant air conditioning unit, the occasional buzz of a passing bee, and the steady, reassuring presence of Megan at Hailey's side. Hailey lingered for a moment near a brick wall, sipping her water, the bottle cool in her hand. Megan decided to go inside Woolworth's to ask about the tryout, leaving Hailey outside for what she thought would be just a minute. No one at the store knew about any event. Megan returned outside, her cheerful mood slipping as she realized Hailey was no longer where she'd left her. The alley seemed empty. The summer heat, once comforting, now pressed down with an uneasy weight. That moment, so ordinary, so fleeting, marked the last time anyone saw Hailey alive. The stillness of that afternoon would echo for years, unraveling the peace that once defined Clintonville and turning the Graceland shopping center from a place of memories into a symbol of all that had been lost. The summer sun had shifted behind thickening clouds as the afternoon wore on, but no one at the Graceland shopping center noticed anything out of place. At least, not at first. Clintonville was a town that ran on routine. A security guard sipped his lukewarm coffee and watched the comings and goings near the old Woolworth store, distracted more by boredom than by any real concern. Inside, cashiers counted their drawers, teenagers browsed for bargain CDs, and outside the hum of traffic rolled past, oblivious to what was unfolding in the quiet space behind the mall. Hailey Porter's last recorded moment was caught by a grainy black and white camera bolted high above the Woolworth's loading dock. At 2:10 p.m., she stood alone by the brick wall, her posture relaxed, sipping her water, waiting for Megan to return. A car drove past in the distance, its headlights briefly flickering in the afternoon haze. The camera stuttered for a moment, losing focus. When the image cleared again, Hailey was gone, as if she'd vanished into thin air. Inside the store, Megan grew increasingly uneasy as she realized that nobody knew about the cheerleading tryout the woman had described. "Sorry, sweetheart," said the gray-haired cashier. "No event here today." For a brief, naive moment, Megan wondered if maybe they'd gotten the wrong date or the wrong store. Shrugging, she hurried back outside, expecting to see Hailey waiting, maybe growing impatient. But the alley behind Woolworth's was empty. A sense of unease blossomed in Megan's chest, quickly turning to panic as she scanned the area, calling Hailey's name. The only answer was the distant whir of a delivery truck pulling away. Megan circled the corner, peering between dumpsters and behind utility poles, but there was no sign of her friend. The air felt heavier now, tinged with something sour and unfamiliar. For the first time that summer, Clintonville no longer felt safe. Within half an hour, Megan had run through every possibility in her mind. Maybe Hailey had decided to walk home. Maybe she'd gotten tired of waiting. Maybe this was a joke, a silly prank between friends. But when she saw the striped pink towel lying crumpled in the dirt near the fence, next to a single sandal and a half-empty water bottle, her fear became something much sharper. The towel was still damp, the water bottle sweating in the August heat. A sharp-eyed passerby noticed Megan's distress, and soon, a crowd began to form. Curious neighbors, a few off-duty mall workers, and eventually, the local police. The first officers on scene moved quickly, taping off the area, canvassing the parking lot, taking statements from Megan and anyone else who might have seen something. As news spread, families across Clintonville grew anxious. Text messages and phone calls spread the story faster than the local news. And as the sun began to set, the community rallied together. That evening, the search for Hailey Porter became an all-hands mission. Volunteers grabbed flashlights and fanned out in teams, combing every inch of the woods behind the Graceland shopping center. Dogs barked at the scent of something unfamiliar. The local news interrupted scheduled programming with a missing child alert, the anchor's voice solemn as Hailey's school photo flashed on the screen. Parents kept their own children indoors, hugging them a little tighter. The ordinary rhythms of Clintonville, the hum of lawnmowers, the distant music from the ice cream shop, faded away, replaced by the tense urgency of hope mixed with fear. In every dark corner and tangled bush, searchers imagined they heard a voice, a cry for help, but each time they found only silence, broken by the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. All night, flashlights danced through the trees, cutting narrow paths of hope through the darkness. But by dawn, only dread remained. As the first pale light of morning crept over the rooftops, a new reality settled over Clintonville. One of their own had vanished, and the world they thought they knew had changed forever. Dawn arrived heavy and gray, carrying with it the quiet dread of something irrevocable. The search party's voices, once loud and hopeful, faded to murmurs as they combed the edge of the woods behind Graceland Shopping Center. Sunlight struggled through the thick canopy, painting the undergrowth in patches of dull gold. For hours, parents, police, and neighbors had pressed forward, their faces drawn and pale, each step echoing the silent question, where was Hailey Porter? Then, just after sunrise, a sharp cry pierced the hush, a sound that froze every heart. At the base of a tangled thicket, a volunteer had stumbled on something out of place. The crumpled remains of Hailey's pink towel caught on a low branch, and, a few feet further, the unmistakable shape of a small, motionless figure. Police rushed in, cordoning off the area with yellow tape as the world seemed to narrow to that single spot in the woods. Hailey lay face down among the ferns, her hands folded tightly across her chest, as if in some final act of prayer or protection. Her hair was matted with dew and earth, and her slender frame was still, heartbreakingly fragile in the morning light. The scene was eerily peaceful, and yet the violence that had visited this place was undeniable. Not far from her body, detectives found a heavy 2x4 plank, its edges rough and splintered, streaked with the unmistakable darkness of dried blood. It didn't take long for the lead investigator to understand what had happened. Hailey's head had been struck with brutal force, once, perhaps twice, enough to leave no doubt about the cause of death. Later, the autopsy would confirm it. Massive blunt force trauma, a fatal blow that ended a young life in an instant. There were no signs of sexual assault, and nothing appeared stolen. No purse, no jewelry missing, only the remnants of a summer afternoon scattered across the ground. A sandal, a hair tie, the water bottle, now tipped and empty. The senselessness of it all struck the investigators, who worked in grim silence, collecting evidence, snapping photographs, placing numbered markers in the dirt. Word spread quickly, carried on hushed phone calls, and the low voices of neighbors gathered at their fences. The entire Clintonville community, once so defined by safety and the comforting rhythm of suburban life, felt itself suddenly exposed, fragile in a way no one had imagined possible. The old certainty, the belief that tragedies happened only elsewhere, shattered in the face of what they'd lost. Hailey's mother, Martha Porter, arrived at the scene before police could stop her. She broke through the yellow tape, stumbling over tree roots and patches of bramble, driven by a mother's instinct to protect. When she saw the small body lying among the ferns, she dropped to her knees, clutching Hailey's t-shirt to her chest and weeping into the silence. The officers stood back, heads bowed, allowing her a moment of impossible grief. By noon, the woods had filled with the grim pageantry of a crime scene. Reporters whispering into cameras, police radios crackling, photographers crouched at the tree line. The community watched from a distance, stunned and helpless, as investigators carried out their work. The local news ran constant updates, the anchor's voice solemn as he repeated the facts, his words growing heavier with each broadcast. Hailey Porter, 15, found dead behind Graceland shopping center. The shockwave rolled outward, reaching every corner of Clintonville. That day, nothing else mattered. Not the routine of daily life, not errands, not backyard chores. Mothers called their children home, locking doors and checking windows twice. Fathers lingered in doorways, watching the street, waiting for the world to feel normal again. But something had changed, permanently. A Saturday that began with laughter at the pool had ended in heartbreak, and the echoes of that loss would haunt Clintonville for years to come. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, Clintonville found itself gripped by both sorrow and fear. The once innocent streets became a labyrinth of suspicion and whispered theories. Police worked around the clock, reconstructing every moment of the day Hailey disappeared, piecing together a timeline from scattered memories and shaky camera footage. The community needed answers, and they needed them quickly. The investigation began with the simple facts. At 1:45 p.m., Hailey and Megan left the public pool. By 2:10, Hailey was caught on camera near the Woolworth's loading dock, her last known appearance. Just 15 minutes later, a nearby resident reported hearing a scream behind the shopping center, sharp and startling enough to rattle even the most jaded nerves. The time window was painfully tight, and every second mattered. As police canvassed the area, a key witness emerged. Thomas Reed, a middle-aged maintenance worker familiar to most of the mall's shop owners. He had spent years sweeping floors, fixing leaks, and clearing trash from the back lots. On the afternoon of the crime, Thomas called police at 2:40 p.m., his voice trembling as he claimed to have seen a tall man in a white shirt beating a girl with a wooden stick near the edge of the woods. Thomas didn't just report the crime. He led officers straight to the scene, weaving through the undergrowth with surprising certainty. There, he was the first to discover Hailey's body, and crucially, the first to touch the blood-streaked wooden plank before police could secure it. His account was vivid, almost rehearsed, describing a stranger who seemed to vanish as quickly as he appeared. Still, as detectives questioned him, some details didn't add up. No one else reported seeing the man in white. Shoe prints found around Hailey's body matched Thomas's own size and pattern. Security footage showed Thomas in the area during the relevant time, lingering near the back entrance with no clear reason to be there. Yet Thomas insisted on his story, repeating it word for word in every interview. Despite these inconsistencies, the investigation soon took a different turn. The public's anxiety grew to fever pitch as news coverage intensified. Parents demanded justice, and the pressure on police mounted with each passing day. That's when attention shifted to Raymond Givens, a 27-year-old drifter known to wander the area around the shopping center. Raymond's life was a collection of broken routines and misunderstood behaviors. His mental health struggles made him an easy target for suspicion. After hours of intense interrogation, with no attorney present, Raymond's answers grew confused. Under relentless questioning, he finally mumbled, "Maybe I did something bad to the girl." It was hardly a confession, but in the desperate eyes of the authorities and the community, it was enough. The next morning, newspapers blared, "Hailey Porter case solved." Relief washed over Clintonville, though it was tinged with uncertainty, a quiet sense that something wasn't right. But for those who had watched the case unfold closely, doubts lingered. The shoe prints, the sequence of events, the questionable confession, all pointed to a story that didn't quite fit together. Thomas Reed faded into the background, returning to his work as the mall's caretaker, while Raymond Givens sat alone in a holding cell, the weight of the town's relief settling on his shoulders. Clintonville wanted closure, but the truth was far from settled. Beneath the surface of relief, uneasy questions remained, questions that would fester and resurface in the years ahead. For now, though, the town clung to the fragile belief that the worst was over, not realizing that the real answers had slipped quietly through their fingers. As weeks turned into months, the initial frenzy faded, but a cold, uneasy silence settled over Clintonville. With Raymond Givens in jail, the town forced itself to move on. The Porters withdrew from public view, their house at the end of Cedar Lane becoming a place of hushed footsteps and half-closed curtains. David Porter spent long hours at work, staring through spreadsheets he could barely comprehend. Martha drifted through her days like a ghost, her only solace found in tending the wildflowers Hailey once loved. Yet not everyone felt the peace that the headlines promised. Something about the case gnawed at Detective Kate Bell, who had joined the Columbus Police Department's cold case unit a few years later. She kept the file tucked on the edge of her desk, reviewing it on sleepless nights. She couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, a vital detail had been overlooked, something hiding in plain sight. The first hint of hope came nearly 2 years after the tragedy. Advances in forensic science had transformed the way evidence was handled across the country. Hailey's case was quietly selected for re-examination through the National Evidence Retesting Program, a last-ditch effort to bring closure to the families left behind by unsolved crimes. The wooden plank, the weapon that had ended Hailey's life, was shipped to a state lab for DNA testing. There, under bright fluorescent lights, scientists extracted trace materials no one in 1998 could have detected. When the results came back, they shattered the fragile peace Clintonville had built. The DNA on the weapon did not match Raymond Givens. In fact, it didn't match anyone in the state's criminal database. Raymond, who had spent nearly 3 years behind bars, was quietly released and exonerated. His name appeared in the news for a single day, and then vanished again, like so many others whose lives were chewed up and forgotten by the system. The revelation reignited a quiet sense of outrage in the community. Had justice ever really been served? Families whispered among themselves, piecing together old rumors and new suspicions. The Porters never spoke publicly about the reversal, but Martha's eyes grew even sadder, and each August 15th, she made the same pilgrimage, walking alone through the woods behind Graceland, a small bouquet of wildflowers clutched to her chest. She stopped at a modest plaque, nestled in the shadows, the engraved words catching the morning light. Our Hailey, forever 15. Years slipped by. Life, stubborn as ever, found a way to continue. New families moved into Clintonville, children grew, and the world spun forward. But for those touched by Hailey's loss, time moved differently. The case faded into memory for most, a cautionary tale told in whispers to keep kids close, to lock doors before dusk. Yet for the Porters, every detail remained sharp. The color of Hailey's towel, the taste of that last dinner she never came home for, the shape of her empty room, these things never changed. Detective Bell kept working, pushing against the inertia of time. She tracked down witnesses who had moved away, re-interviewed the old suspects, and visited the Graceland shopping center late at night, hoping for inspiration. Sometimes, standing alone at the edge of the woods, she swore she could hear a voice on the breeze, urging her not to give up. The case, officially marked Unsolved, was now a cold file in a metal drawer. But beneath the surface, the story still burned, its truth waiting patiently, just out of reach. Nearly 20 years had passed since the day Hailey Porter vanished, and the tragedy had become a faded scar in Clintonville's collective memory. For most, the story was a cautionary whisper, an unsettling chapter from the past. But for others, those who carried guilt or questions, the wound had never fully healed. Time had moved on, but the truth, stubborn and silent, still waited in the shadows. Autumn in Columbus had a way of stirring old memories. In 2017, the leaves along High Street blazed gold and crimson, and the evening air grew sharp with the promise of another winter. On one such evening, the lobby of the Columbus Police Department was quieter than usual. The glass doors slid open, and a woman stepped inside, her footsteps hesitant, her eyes red-rimmed from a night without sleep. Her name was Lila Jacobs, 33 years old, hair pulled back in a nervous ponytail. She'd lived most of her life beneath the weight of secrets she was too frightened to speak aloud. But recently, something inside her had shifted, a restless conscience awakened by a late-night television special about Ohio's cold cases. Hailey's picture had flashed across the screen, her smile frozen in time. Lila couldn't escape the memory, couldn't escape what she'd heard long ago, even as she'd tried to bury it. At the front desk, Lila asked to speak with someone from the cold case unit. She fidgeted in the waiting room, heart pounding as she rehearsed what she would say, what she had tried to forget. When Detective Bell arrived, notebook in hand, Lila's confession spilled out in trembling waves. For nearly 20 years, Lila had hidden the truth. She was Thomas Reed's niece, the maintenance worker who'd discovered Hailey's body, the first to touch the murder weapon, the man whose testimony had once steered the investigation off course. Back in 1998, Lila was 15, living with her uncle in a cramped apartment just blocks from Graceland. Thomas had always been unpredictable, his moods darkened by alcohol and regret. One night, not long after Hailey's murder, Thomas had stumbled home late, reeking of sweat and whiskey. Lila, pretending to sleep, heard his heavy steps in the hallway. He hovered in her doorway, his voice slurred and chilling. The girl screamed too loud, so I made her stop. The words twisted through the darkness, sharp as a knife. If you tell anyone, I'll do the same to you. Terrified, Lila had locked herself in the bathroom, knees pressed to her chest, willing herself to forget. She never told a soul, not her friends, not the teachers who noticed her sudden silence. The secret became a constant ache, shaping her every decision, every relationship, every moment of her adulthood. Even after Thomas died of a stroke in 2015, she couldn't bring herself to speak out. Fear and guilt a heavy shroud over her life. But as the years passed and the story faded from public view, Lila's burden grew unbearable. The television special brought the memories back with a vengeance. She saw Hailey's parents, older and grayer, but still grieving. She saw herself, still a frightened teenager, still complicit in a crime she never committed but could not escape. That night, unable to sleep, Lila made her decision. She wrote down everything she remembered, every fragment of that confession, every detail Thomas had let slip over the years. And now, trembling in a police station under flickering fluorescent lights, she finally gave voice to the secret that had haunted her for 2 decades. Her testimony breathed new life into a case grown cold. For the first time in years, Detective Bell felt a spark of hope. The truth, long buried, was finally clawing its way into the light. The days that followed Lila Jacobs's confession pulsed with a new electric urgency. The cold case file, long relegated to a bottom drawer, found itself back in the center of the Columbus Police Department's attention. Detective Kate Bell pored over the notes, each page heavy with the weight of 2 lost decades. Lila's story wasn't just a memory. It was a turning key, unlocking old evidence and unexplored avenues. Forensic scientists were summoned, new technology brought to bear on artifacts that had once been dead ends. The water bottle Hailey had clutched in her final moments was carefully retrieved from evidence storage, its faded label and scratched plastic now priceless. Hidden beneath the residue of time, a set of fingerprints emerged, partial, but clear enough to run against updated databases. They weren't Hailey's, they weren't Megan's, they belonged to Thomas Reed. A single hair fiber, long overlooked, was carefully lifted from Hailey's shirt. DNA analysis had advanced light years since 1998, and now, with a delicate swab and a hum of machinery, the lab returned results that made the detectives' hearts pound. The match was nearly perfect, a 99.8% certainty that the hair came from Thomas Reed. As the evidence mounted, the details from Lila's childhood returned with alarming clarity. She remembered how her uncle seemed on edge that August, jumpier than usual, hands trembling when he poured his morning coffee, eyes darting to the headlines in the paper. She recalled the moment he burned a torn white shirt in the backyard drum, the sharp scent of smoke clinging to her hair long after she went inside. At the time, she'd convinced herself it meant nothing. Now, in the harsh light of truth, every moment took on new and terrible significance. Detectives pieced together the timeline with growing confidence. Thomas Reed, the maintenance worker who knew every shortcut and shadow behind the Graceland shopping center, had been in the right place at the wrong time. He had access to every locked door, every forgotten alley. He'd reported finding Hailey's body, playing the role of shocked witness, all while leaving behind traces that would eventually point directly back at him. The realization brought both relief and sorrow. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived, but it was too late for confrontation, too late for trial. Thomas Reed had died in 2015, taken by a stroke in his sleep. There would be no cross-examination, no public reckoning, no chance for the Porters to face the man responsible for their daughter's death. The case was officially declared solved, but the resolution came wrapped in a shroud of sadness. At the press conference announcing the breakthrough, The weight of the moment was palpable. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and the eyes of an entire community turned toward the front of the room. Martha Porter, her hair streaked with gray, her hands trembling but steady, stood before the microphone. She spoke quietly, her voice steady even as tears glistened on her cheeks. "I've forgiven him, but I'll never forget." Her words hung in the air, lingering long after the cameras stopped rolling. In that instant, Clintonville felt the full force of 2 decades of loss and longing, of unanswered questions and enduring love. The town had finally received its answer, but the price had been high. Years spent searching, mourning, waiting for a closure that always seemed out of reach. For Detective Bell and her team, the victory was bittersweet. The truth had surfaced, but it had taken its time, leaving behind scars that would never truly heal. In the quiet that followed, the people of Clintonville looked at one another with new awareness, reminded of how thin the line was between ordinary days and unthinkable tragedy. Hailey Porter's memory, and the hard-won answers that finally emerged, would remain with them forever. Stories linger, their echoes rippling outward from the source show, sometimes fading into myth, sometimes growing sharper with time. For Clintonville, the tragedy of Hailey Porter became more than a local legend. It was woven into the fabric of the community's collective memory. Yet the tale carried another shadow, the trace of a real case that haunted Ohio for decades. In the quiet corners of the Columbus Library, between yellowed news clippings and dusty case files, a different name waited to be discovered: Christy Lynn Mullins. The year was 1975, and Christy, only 14, left the Linden swimming pool with a friend on a sunny August afternoon. Her world, like Hailey's, was small and safe, a mosaic of neighborhood rituals, the steady rhythm of school, chores, and summer adventures. She never made it home that day. Christy's disappearance sent shockwaves through Columbus, just as Hailey's would years later in Clintonville. Police, neighbors, and volunteers combed the area near Graceland shopping center, flashlights flickering in the woods, hope dissolving as hours passed. The search ended in heartbreak. Christy's body was found in a wooded lot behind the mall, her life cut short by violence no one in the city could comprehend. The investigation that followed was hurried, pressured by headlines and the gnawing fear that any child could be next. Desperate for answers, authorities focused on a young man with cognitive disabilities who often wandered the shopping center's grounds. Isolated by circumstance, misunderstood by many, he became the ideal suspect. After a grueling interrogation, he broke, whispering confused statements the police interpreted as confession. With this, Columbus declared the case closed, eager to return to normalcy. But normalcy never really returned. The conviction left Christy's family, and the entire community, with a lingering sense of unease. Over the years, doubts mounted. Some whispered that the case felt unfinished, that the truth had been hurried into silence for the sake of comfort. Christy's parents, their grief unending, continued to press for answers, never letting the memory of their daughter fade beneath official narratives. It took decades and the perseverance of a few dogged investigators and journalists before the case was reopened. Forensic advancements finally revealed what many had feared all along. The wrong man had paid the price. In the end, it was another figure from the shadows, a man who had once positioned himself as a helpful witness, who bore the true guilt. Henry H. Newell, Jr., a maintenance worker with intimate knowledge of the mall, was posthumously identified as Christy's killer. By then, He too was beyond the reach of earthly justice. The pain of delayed truth settled over Columbus, echoing through the years in every parent's cautious glance, every child warned never to talk to strangers. The lesson was stark. Justice, when rushed, can become its own kind of tragedy. Hailey Porter's fictional story, though imagined, carried the imprint of Christy Lynn Mullins's real-life ordeal. Both were girls whose lives were stolen on what should have been ordinary days. Both communities sought closure, only to find that the path to truth was longer, more winding, and more painful than anyone wished to believe. In both stories, innocence was lost, but not forgotten. Families pressed forward with courage, refusing to let memory dissolve into silence. Investigators, haunted by their mistakes, swore never to stop searching. And the towns, shaped by grief and the lessons of history, carried forward a simple hope that future tragedies might be averted, that justice, however late, might still find its way home. The years passed, but the memory of Hailey Porter endured, woven into the fabric of Clintonville, a gentle warning whispered on summer evenings and echoed in the cautious hearts of parents everywhere. In a quiet corner of the woods behind Graceland Shopping Center, a modest plaque remained. Our Hailey, forever 15. Wildflowers grew thick around it, tended each August by Martha Porter, who refused to let time erase her daughter's light. Every so often, a child would ask about the plaque, about the girl in the faded photograph on the anniversary news story. Grown-ups would lower their voices and retell the story, how a community once believed itself immune to tragedy, how a single summer afternoon shattered that illusion, and how, through sorrow and persistence, the truth had finally come to light. Hailey's name became a lesson, not in fear, but in vigilance, kindness, and the enduring need for justice. For the Porter family, closure came not as a sudden dawn, but as a gradual acceptance, the sharp pain of loss blunted by the knowledge that Hailey had not been forgotten. Martha, each year, still walked the wooded path, pausing where sunlight dappled through the trees, the air rich with the scent of earth and memory. She would kneel among the wildflowers and whisper a few words, sometimes of sorrow, sometimes gratitude, always of love. David Porter grew quieter with age, but he found peace in the simple act of tending the home Hailey had filled with laughter. Their strength, tested by unimaginable pain, became a quiet beacon to others who would in time face their own dark nights. Across town, in school assemblies and neighborhood gatherings, Hailey's story was retold, each telling carrying its own lesson. Never trust invitations from strangers, especially those who seek out the vulnerable. Never walk alone in secluded places, even ones that feel safe. Report anything suspicious, no matter how small it may seem. And above all, cherish and protect the children in your life. For safety is not just the absence of danger, but the presence of vigilance and community. The echoes of Hailey's loss stretched further still. In police departments and classrooms, her name was invoked as a reason to keep looking, to never let a case grow cold out of convenience or fatigue. The mistakes of the past, wrongful accusations, ignored evidence, hasty conclusions, became touchstones for change. Hailey's story, and the story of Christy Lynn Mullins before her, reminded everyone that justice is often slow and imperfect, but it can endure when carried by love, determination, and truth. For Detective Kate Bell and the cold case team, the resolution of Hailey's case brought satisfaction tempered by sorrow. The truth had arrived, if late, but it had come because people cared enough to keep searching. because a single voice, trembling, burdened by years of guilt, chose to speak out at last. That lesson resonated deeply. Sometimes, the difference between justice and injustice lies in the courage to remember, to question, to act even when hope feels distant. In the end, some wounds would never fully heal. But through remembrance, through vigilance, and through community, there was comfort to be found. A promise that Hailey's life, though cut short, would continue to inspire and protect others. And so, to those who still believe in justice, who hope that another cold case might find its light, the call remains. Speak up, look out for one another, never stop searching for the truth. Because somewhere, someone's story is still waiting for its ending.